Usually when we talk about history, we have these very clear, almost cinematic mental images.
Mm,
And for the 20th century, there is one image that dominates everything else. It's the caricature of the monster.
right.
The military uniform, the shouting, the absolute concentrated evil. It's almost like a comic book villain.
It is.
But today, we are doing something a little different. We're taking a stack of sources that peel back that uniform to look at the person underneath. And frankly, what we find is arguably more disturbing.
Exactly. It is comfortable to look at history's greatest catastrophes and blame them on a monster, because monsters are anomalies. They aren't human.
Right, if he's a demon, we're safe.
We're safe, exactly, because demons are rare.
Yeah.
But the reality is far more complex and far more uncomfortable. The sources we are looking at today conduct what they call a psychological autopsy.
A psychological autopsy.
Yes, the goal isn't to sympathize, far from it. It's to analyze. We need to understand the eerie, mundane, and frankly bizarre details of the man himself to understand how this happened.
And looking at the research you've pulled, some of these details are just wild.
They are.
I mean, we're talking about a failed artist living in homeless shelters, a strict vegetarian who obsessed over animal rights while committing genocide.
And by the end, a man who was essentially a walking chemical experiment.
That is the mission of this deep dive, then. We are looking at three main pillars that the sources highlight. The failure of an artist, the bizarre contradictions, and the chemical cocktail that fueled his decline.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I think for a lot of people, the story starts with the rise to power in the 1930s. But the forces point to a much earlier, much more, well, pathetic beginning. We have to go back to 1907 in Vienna.
Right. Before the swastika, there was a paintbrush. That is the phrase the text uses. In 1907 and 1908, a young Adolf Hitler applied to the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. He didn't just want to be a politician. At that point, politics wasn't even really on his radar. He wanted to be a painter, and he was incredibly confident.
He thought he was a shoo-in, right?
He did. He was convinced of his own genius, but he was rejected twice.
Wow.
And the feedback from the professors is fascinating because it's so specific. They didn't just say, "You're bad." The verdict was that he had no talent for painting.
That's pretty blunt.
It is. Specifically, they noted that he was decent at drawing buildings, architectural structures, but he had a complete inability to draw the human form.
That feels like a heavy metaphor for what came later. Good at structures, terrible at people.
Ideally, yes, it is a foreshadowing, but practically at that moment it was a career killer. The professors actually gave him advice,
What was that?
They suggested he try the School of Architecture instead. They saw that his talent lay in lines and stone, not in capturing life.
Which seems like a logical pivot. Why didn't he take it?
He couldn't.
Right.
This is where the biographical details get gritty. To get into the architecture school, you needed a high school diploma, the abitur.
And he didn't have one.
He had dropped out of secondary school years earlier, so he was stuck. He didn't pivot to architecture. Instead, he drifted. The sources describe his life post-rejection, and it is a stark contrast to the newsreels we're used to.
Not a revolutionary.
Not at all. He wasn't meeting in secret basements. He was living in homeless shelters in Vienna.
Yeah. The image of him selling hand-painted postcards just to buy food, it's so small, it's so mundane.
It is. He was living in a men's hostel, the Männerheim, effectively destitute. He wore a donated coat that was too big for him. He spent his days painting cheap watercolors of Vienna's landmarks to sell to tourists.
And that mundanity is what leads to the great what if that historians often grapple with.
Right. The source poses the question. If the Academy had accepted him, or if he had finished high school and gone into architecture then, the history of the 20th century might have been written in colors rather than blood.
That is a heavy thought. But the art thing didn't just go away, right? It seems like he carried that rejection with him all the way to the top.
Absolutely not. It wasn't just a past life he forgot about. It manifested in a lingering obsession. We see this with the Führer Museum.
This was the plan for that massive art gallery, right?
Correct. He planned to build the world's largest art gallery in Linz, Austria, which was his childhood home. He wanted to turn this provincial town into the cultural capital of Europe.
So it was to overshadow Vienna.
To completely overshadow Vienna, the city that rejected him.
Talk about a grudge. It sounds like he was trying to settle a score with the city itself.
It's deeply vindictive. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the Nazi art looting regarding Jewish families and occupied nations, the sources argue it wasn't just simple theft for monetary value, it was personal.
So he was stealing masterpieces to fill the museum. He was never talented enough to join as a creator.
Exactly. He couldn't be the artist, so he forced the world to make him the greatest curator. He was rewriting his own failure using the power of the state. He spent hours looking at architectural models of this museum, even while the war was turning against him.
That was his escape.
It was his escape into the life he originally wanted.
That is chilling.
Yeah.
It's like he was trying to brute force artistic validation.
Yeah.
But okay, let's move from the artist to the soldier. Because there's this gap between the homeless painter and the dictator, and that gap is World War I.
Precisely. And again, the reality contradicts the myth. The propaganda portrays him as this heroic, commanding leader, but during the First World War, he was a Meldegänger.
For those who don't speak German, that's a dispatch runner, right?
Yes. Now, we have to be fair to the historical record here. We shouldn't dismiss the danger.
Okay.
The sources note it was one of the most dangerous jobs in the trenches. He was running messages back and forth under artillery fire because radio communications were unreliable. He was wounded twice.
And he won the Iron Cross.
He even earned the Iron Cross First Class, which was rare for someone of his rank.
So he wasn't a coward, historically speaking.
No, he wasn't. But the pivotal moment isn't his bravery, it's his injury. And I honestly didn't realize the depth of this detail until I read through this stack.
You mean the blindness?
Yes. It happened in October 1918. He was blinded by a British gas attack, likely mustard gas. He was evacuated to a hospital in Paleswalk.
And this is crucial because of when it happened.
The timing is everything. He was lying in a hospital bed, eyes bandaged, physically unable to see, when a pastor came in and announced that the Kaiser had abdicated and Germany had surrendered.
And that's the snapping point.
That is the psychological turn. Some sources even suggest the blindness became hysterical or psychosomatic, meaning his physical eyes healed, but his brain refused to see because the trauma of the defeat was too great.
Wow.
In that darkness, the stab-in-the-back myth took root.
The Dolchstoßlegende.
Right. He refused to believe Germany had been defeated on the battlefield. He convinced himself they had been betrayed by internal enemies, Jews, Marxists, civilians on the home front. That radicalization didn't happen in a beer hall. It happened in a hospital bed while he was blind and bitter.
It's terrifying how these personal moments of trauma just snowball into global consequences. But I want to pivot to something that I found really jarring in the reading. We have this image of him as a monster, but then the sources go into his private ethics, and it's weirdly specific.
You are referring to the paradox of his values.
Yeah, the vegetarianism. It feels like an urban legend, but the sources confirm it.
It is a profound disconnect. Here you have a man orchestrating industrial-scale murder, yet he was a strict vegetarian. And it wasn't just a diet, it was policy.
A policy.
Under his regime, Germany passed some of the most advanced animal protection laws of the world at that time.
Wait, really? Like actual legislation?
Yes. Bans on vivisection, which is experimenting on live animals. Strict hunting regulations. There were even laws about how to painfully boil lobster.
I don't even know what to say to that.
The source highlights this jarring contradiction. A regime that had zero regard for human life had immense legal regard for animal life.
How do you even reconcile that mentally? I'm going to exterminate millions of people, but don't you dare hurt that rabbit.
It ties back to a twisted version of nature worship. The Nazi ideology was obsessed with the natural order. They viewed animals as pure, part of the Germanic landscape.
But not people.
They viewed the specific groups of people they targeted as unnatural or a virus. So in his warped worldview, protecting the wolf or the eagle was noble, while destroying human beings was cleaning.
That is a disturbing insight. It essentially dehumanizes people to a level below animals. And speaking of animals, we have to talk about the dog, Blondi.
His German Shepherd.
The sources say she was perhaps the only being he truly loved, which is saying something.
It creates a confusing image, doesn't it? Seeing a dictator play affectionately with a dog in the Bavarian Alps. There are hours of home movies showing this. But the end of Blondi's story is where the true psychology reveals itself. It strips away any illusion of softness.
Yeah, tell us what happened to her, because this really stuck with me.
In the final days in the bunker, April 1945, the Soviets are closing in. Hitler decides to commit suicide. But he's paranoid. He doesn't trust the cyanide capsules the SS provided him. He thinks they might have been swapped for a sleeping agent or something that wouldn't work.
So he needs a test subject.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He didn't send Blondi away to safety. He ordered the doctor to crush a cyanide capsule in her mouth.
He killed his own dog just to check if the poison worked.
Yes. The sources describe him looking at the dead dog for a moment with no visible emotion, just confirmation. It is the ultimate act of cold pragmatism overriding affection.
Wow.
Even the creature he supposedly loved most was, in the end, just a tool to be used for his own exit strategy.
That really sums it up. Cold pragmatism. There's no empathy there, even for the things he claimed to love. It was all about utility.
It was.
But speaking of big, cold ideas, remember how the art professors told him to try architecture?
Yes.
Well, he clearly didn't forget that either. Because when he got power, he didn't just want to rule the world, he wanted to redesign it. Literally.
This is the Germania obsession. Alongside Albert Speer, his favorite architect, he planned to completely rebuild Berlin into the capital of the world, renamed Germania. And the scale. The scale was simply megalomaniacal.
The Volksschau. The People's Hall. Describe this thing for us, because the dimensions are hard to wrap your head around.
Imagine the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., or St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Now imagine a dome so large that you could fit the entire Eiffel Tower inside it and still have room to spare.
No.
The dome was designed to be 16 times larger than St. Peter's. It was designed to hold 180,000 people standing.
And the whole point was to make the individual feel small.
Completely insignificant, literally like an ant in the face of the state.
That's too big. It sounds like something a child would draw. I want a building bigger than the sky.
That's the point. It was so big it defied the laws of nature. And here's a detail from the notes that I find absolutely fascinating and horrific. Engineers at the time actually ran the numbers on the physics of having that many people inside a concrete dome.
This is the indoor rain thing, right? This blew my mind.
It is bizarre. They calculated that the perspiration and breath of the 180,000 people packed into this hall would rise up. But because the dome was so high and unventilated, that moisture would hit the cold concrete ceiling, condense, and fall back down as precipitation.
So it would literally rain sweat and breath on the crowd.
Essentially, yes, it would create its own weather system. It illustrates the psychology perfectly. Plans so grandiose, so obsessed with size and dominance, that they ignored basic reality.
They wanted to build a building that would technically function as a cloud chamber for human exhalation. It's just total detachment from reality.
I don't want to be.
Physics be damned.
And if we are talking about detachment from reality, we have to talk about the physical state of the man himself. Because by the end, he wasn't just high on power.
Ah, yes. The decline. The drugs. In the later footage of him, the newsreels from 44 and 45, you always see the shaking, the tremors. He keeps his left hand behind his back to hide it. He looks frail. I always assumed it was just stress or maybe Parkinson's.
That's the common assumption. But the sources paint a very different, very specific picture. It brings us to Dr. Theodor Morell.
The Reichmaster of injections. What a nickname.
An appropriate one, though the other Nazi leaders hated him. They called him a quack. But Hitler trusted him implicitly. Morell was Hitler's personal physician, and he was unconventional, to say the least.
Unconventional how?
By the end of the war, he had turned the Dictator into a walking chemical experiment.
We aren't talking about an aspirin a day here. What kind of regimen are we looking at?
The patient records, he was referred to as Patient A, show injections of over 80 different substances over the years.
80. That's a cocktail bar, not a prescription.
It was a cocktail. It started with high-dose vitamins and glucose, but as the war turned against Germany, the drugs got harder. It included Providin.
Which we should clarify for the listeners. Providin is essentially methamphetamine.
Yes. It was the same drug given to German soldiers to keep them awake during the Blitzkrieg. Crystal meth in a pill. But Hitler was getting it intravenously. He was also receiving Eucadol,
Which is?
a synthetic opioid, twice as strong as morphine.
So essentially he was speedballing. He was taking a potent upper to be alert and aggressive during the day and a potent downer to calm down or sleep.
That sounds like a recipe for psychosis.
It absolutely is. And then it gets into the realm of medical absurdity. I saw a mention in your notes of animal extracts.
Yeah, this part actually made me laugh in a dark way. Bull testicles.
Yes, Morell was injecting him with extracts from bull testicles and pig hearts.
Why? Just butt whack.
It was believed to boost vitality, energy, and libido. You have to imagine the chemical chaos happening inside his body. He was riding a roller coaster of high-grade stimulants, sedatives, and animal hormones daily. His veins were reportedly collapsing from the frequency of the injections.
So what does this all mean for his decision-making? Because we often think of him moving armies around on a map like a master strategist.
Well, if we connect this to the erratic behavior in those final years, the paranoia, the trembling hands, the irrational refusal to allow retreats, it starts to make clinical sense. The Parkinson-like tremors weren't just old age. They were likely the result of this massive, sustained intake of narcotics and stimulants.
He was chemically unstable while trying to command a collapsing front.
Exactly. It really deconstructs the mastermind myth, doesn't it?
It really does. You don't have a 4D chess player. You have a junkie with the codes to the army.
Precisely. And that is why this psychological autopsy is so important. When you see the tremors in the footage, you aren't seeing a man trembling with rage. You are seeing a man trembling from withdrawal or chemical toxicity. So let's step back and look at the whole picture we've built here. We started with the idea of a monster, but now we have this mess.
We have a failed artist who couldn't handle rejection and hated the human form. A soldier radicalized by blindness and a lie. A vegetarian who prioritized animal laws while industrializing human slaughter.
A megalomaniac who wanted to build halls that rained on people. And finally, a drug addict shaking in a bunker, killing his dog.
It's pathetic, but it's also terrifying because it's real.
That is the takeaway. If we simply view him as a cartoon monster, we separate him from humanity, we say, oh, that was a demon, that can't happen again.
But when we look at the mundane details, the art school rejection, the bad medical advice, the vanity, we are forced to confront the complexity of history. These were human flaws amplified by absolute power.
It forces us to realize that history isn't just made by great men or monsters, it's made by broken people. And honestly, it leaves me with one final thought that I can't get out of my head. It goes back to that first rejection letter from the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts in 1907.
The what if?
Yeah. How fragile is history? How different would the world look today if just one professor in Vienna had looked at a portfolio of mediocre architectural drawings and said, you know what, it's not great, but let's give him a passing grade. It's terrifying to think that a single rejection letter could arguably trigger the descent into such darkness.
It is the ultimate butterfly effect, a paintbrush traded for a swastika.
That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.